Hi, my name is Steve Copeland. In this video we will be examining the problem for macroevolution theory regarding irreducible complexity. Darwin described this issue in 1859 as follows. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous, successive, slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. But I can find no such case. Origin of Species, page 158. Michael J. Behe, who is Professor of Biological Sciences at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania and a Senior Fellow at Discovery Institute's Center for Science and Culture, is an expert in this field of study and has produced several books including Darwin's Black Box. Behe writes, in Darwin's time, all of biology was a black box. Not only the cell or the eye or digestion or immunity, but every biological structure and function, because no one could explain how biological processes occurred. Darwin and his contemporaries were studying various life forms and cells with a microscope that looked something like this. They had no idea of the complexity of even the most basic of life forms, the single cell. In the past 100 years, with the help of technology, we now know of many cases of irreducible complexity. For example, bacteria are considered to be one of the simplest life forms and yet contain a propulsion system which is irreducibly complex. Consider bacterial flagellum, sometimes referred to as nature's outboard motor. Like a gearbox in a car, it contains rods, gears, and rings. When bacteria need to move, they engage the molecular clutch, which shifts the gears onto the engine, which spins the gearbox, resulting in propulsion. To stop, they simply disengage the clutch. The question is, how could such a complex system have evolved gradually? Because if one part is missing, it simply doesn't work. So, imagine bacteria with no flagellum propulsion system. A mutation occurs and one part appears. But this part on its own is totally useless, and useless mutations are usually simply discarded. Therefore, the entire system has to come into existence simultaneously. This system then is called irreducibly complex, and its complexity cannot be reduced at all for it to work correctly. Other examples of irreducible complexity which you can research are, for example, the blood clotting cascade, a system which, unless perfect, we would die of blood clotting or bleed to death. You could also research cilia, the adaptive immune system, and even the defense mechanism of the bombardier beetle. You will find such examples in Michael Behe's book Darwin's Black Box, which I highly recommend. But I would like to take us back to a comment I made in the previous video regarding the impossibility of reptilian creatures evolving into birds. This particular example brings together both the issue of missing links and the problem of irreducible complexity. Even about 165 years ago, Darwin was aware that the fossil record was absolutely devoid of the missing links needed to confirm his evolution theory. He recognized that there should be millions of exterminated missing links between species and millions of missing links which evolved from these. He wrote these words, "But just in proportion as this process of extermination acted on an enormous scale, so must the number of intermediate varieties which has formerly existed on Earth be truly enormous. Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links?" Origin of Species, page 259. Now, there have been about 165 years of geological expeditions since Darwin wrote these words, and that enormous number of intermediate creatures have never been found. Indeed, not a single scientifically verifiable missing link. Our school textbooks are still teaching that reptilian creatures evolved into birds. They have created pictures such as this to depict a reptile who starts climbing trees, eventually develops wings, and can finally leap off the branches and fly. This is all pure fantasy, as no intermediary species between reptiles and birds has ever been discovered. Why is that? Firstly is the issue of irreducible complexity. Now, there are two types of creatures which can fly. Those such as bats, which have wings with a membrane and no feathers, and creatures with feathers. The evolutionists would have had you believe that a bat-like creature developed some primitive feathers through DNA mutation, and these mutations eventually produced the perfect feathers required for flight, replacing the skin-like membrane in the process. Now, the problem with this theory is that feathers are irreducibly complex. Feathers are irreducibly complex in their design. Some, like a peacock's tail, are just for beauty, but the feathers used for flight must be perfect in design or the bird cannot fly. The feather is one of those things that Darwin said could destroy his entire theory. It is irreducibly complex. In other words, it could not have evolved from a little bit of fluff to a perfect feather because natural selection demands that only the useful mutations are selected, and less than perfect feather is useless. Nothing can fly unless it has perfectly evolved feathers, or a membrane like a bat. Can you imagine a reptile with less than perfect features jumping out of a tree to test its new wings? Such a creature would not live to pass on those genes. So what would a partially evolved feather even look like? Some suggest that the downy feathers of some birds, which are commonly on waterfowl, are primitive feathers, but in fact they are not used for flight, but to keep the bird warm and waterproof. If a membrane wing developed downy fluff, the creature would simply crash to the ground. And yet, we solved this problem by getting artists to create impressions of dinosaurs with wings and feathers, creatures which have never been found or existed. Evolutionists even give these fictitious names, such as Proavis or Reptiles, but there has never been a single fossil found of these evolutionary inventions, and to present them as evidence is simply deceitful and certainly not scientific. And imagine what kind of miraculous processes would be needed to evolve from hardened scales, which are used for protection, to downy feathers on a reptile's body. So why is it impossible to evolve from a reptile to a bird? The truth is that it has nothing to do with feathers or scales and everything to do with lungs, because reptiles and birds have lung systems which are entirely opposite and incompatible. Reptiles have a similar two-way breathing system to human beings, which accommodates gas exchange. The air goes into the creature, gas exchange takes place, and the creature breathes out through the same aperture. But birds have a breathing system which is one way, a system which generates far higher levels of oxygen which is required for flight. For example, the hummingbird's heart can beat up to 1,260 beats per minute. His heart needs to beat this fast to give enough oxygen for the muscles in his wings, which are moving so fast that the human eye cannot see them moving. Every species of bird has this unique kind of lungs. It means that hummingbirds can move their wings incredibly fast. It means that birds such as the bar-headed goose can migrate and fly at high altitudes where the oxygen is very low, even right over the Himalayan mountains. So would it be possible to go from a reptile's lung to a bird's lung in tiny gradual steps through random mutations? The answer is a definitive no. Every mutation will result in instant death because you simply cannot go from a two-way direction to a one-way direction in gradual steps. Both systems would have to be fully and perfectly developed, or the creature would simply suffocate. Therefore, the creature would have to simultaneously evolve two separate and perfectly functioning systems within one body and then reject the one it didn't need. Both the lungs of reptiles and birds are irreducibly complex and opposite in how they function. Now, some evolutionists have tried to solve this contradiction by introducing the lungfish. This creature has both lungs and gills, therefore it can breathe underwater, and if the water gets too low, it can bury itself in the mud and breathe through its lungs. Some of the oldest fossils known belong to lungfish, but the lungfish is not some extinct missing link. Indeed, they are alive and well and survive basically unchanged as a specific species. A desperate evolutionist may try to make the case that the lungfish mutated into a reptile which discarded its gills, but gills are not a breathing system which works on land. You still have to explain the impossibility of evolving from a two-way reptilian system to a one-way avian system, and the lungfish does not even have the one-way system. Gills and lungs are not the same thing. Hold a lizard underwater and it drowns. Pull a fish out of the water and it gasps for air and it dies. No reptile has ever existed with two independent breathing systems. And the lungfish is not a reptile. I have presented just a few examples of irreducible complexity, but these are barely the tip of the iceberg. Darwin was correct in his statements regarding the missing links and irreducible complexity. He stated that the number of intermediary creatures must be truly enormous, and he questioned why they are absent in every geological formation. The obvious answer is that they are not found because they never existed. Secondly, he stated that if a single complex organ existed, which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, then his theory would absolutely break down. He added that he could find no such case. Well, 165 years later, we have many, many cases. Now, Darwin was an honest man, and I think he would be the first to admit that his theory has absolutely broken down. In a letter to his mentor Charles Lyell in November 1859, he commends Lyell for deliberately giving up a doctrine of modification that Lyell had held for about 30 years. Now, in that context, he writes this: "For myself also, I rejoice profoundly for thinking of the many cases of men pursuing an illusion for years. Often and often a cold shudder has run through me, and I have asked myself whether I may not have devoted my life to a fantasy." Now, contrary to the way that anti-Darwinians have used this statement, Darwin was not admitting that he had devoted his life to a fantasy. Rather, he was admitting the doubts he so often had and stating that, like his friend Lyell, that he had a moral compass to admit if he was proven wrong. Darwin was confident that other scientists would hold themselves to this same moral compass, and this, he said, gave him peace of mind. Personally, I believe Charles Darwin would be absolutely appalled at the unscrupulous and deceptive way that some so-called scientists, for whatever agenda, have twisted his theories to promote a system dedicated to atheism. Why, when I was introduced to this stuff in school, was I never told that Darwin's theory was only a theory? Maybe our school teachers never researched the truth of these matters, and maybe they were too afraid of losing their jobs. And maybe there was simply not enough dissenting voices against the theory at that time. But whatever the case, we were lied to. The question is, why? Why was evidence for intelligent design never taught? Because it was certainly around. Why not give children a balanced view? Just present the evidence and the theories and promote discussion. Why did they present adaptation of species of microevolution as proof of Darwin's theory when they knew that this was absolutely impossible? Why did they present mythical creatures like Pro-Avis as evidence of fossils when this was just an artist's creation and not a single fossil had ever been found? When a system buries the obvious truths and creates fiction to convince the masses, this is no more than propaganda. The propaganda of people with an agenda, with a particular worldview. In America, they gave people the impression that anybody in a white lab coat was beyond question, and that such people had knowledge that the layperson could never understand. So, don't embarrass yourself by questioning them, just trust the scientists. Advertising agencies also jumped on the bandwagon, selling everything from toothpaste to canned food, with actors in lab coats to give their products credibility. Many brilliant people who hold to theistic beliefs, such as John Lennox, were warned to abandon their Christian beliefs or never have an academic career. Lennox stood his ground and became the professor of mathematics at Oxford University. The pressure on educators from kindergartens to universities to conform to the atheist agenda propagated in the Western world has been enormous, and only in the past few decades has this agenda begun to be both challenged and exposed. So, I appeal to you, dare to think for yourself. Recognize that young minds are easily influenced and, like me, you've been fed well-crafted lies to force you to adhere to a specific agenda and worldview. Listen to Lennox, read Denton, read Behe. And furthermore, never fall into the trap of becoming anti-science or some fundamentalist conspiracy theorist. Science is not and has never been the enemy of belief in God. Indeed, the exact opposite. The goal of true science is to explore the world we live in and to come to conclusions about our world based on provable evidence. Many scientists, both atheists and theists, consider Sir Isaac Newton to have been the most brilliant scientist to ever live, a man who based his faith and love for God on doing pure science, on evaluating the evidence before him. Albert Einstein, who saw his own work as building on Newton's, stated, "Newton, forgive me, you found the only way which, in your age, was just possible for a man of highest thought and creative power." Richard Feynman, the Nobel-winning physicist, said, "Nature uses only the longest threads to weave her patterns, so each small piece of fabric reveals the organization of the entire tapestry." Newton saw more of the tapestry than anyone before him. Stephen Hawking, an avowed atheist, stated, "Newton was not only one of the greatest scientists of all time, but he also laid the foundation for much of modern science." Stephen Weinberg, a physicist, claimed, "Newton's Principia is one of the most important scientific books ever written." In regards to his relationship with God, Newton spoke of his creator as a creator and lawgiver, the ultimate source of truth, the one humans should worship and obey and humbly study, a perfect, eternal, omnipotent being, and the author of Scripture. And of himself he wrote, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, while the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." Atheists such as Richard Dawkins try to convince the world that science and faith are incompatible, namely because Dawkins is totally ignorant that biblical faith demands evidence. Newton's faith, like all true biblical faith, was grounded not just in personal conviction, but in the undeniable evidence for God in creation. The difference between Dawkins and Newton, apart from the fact that Newton was a genius, is the issue of human pride and desire for truth. Dawkers and mockers such as the celebrity comedian Ricky Gervais and company are intellectually average compared to Newton, men who arrogantly deny the existence of God, not because of any lack of evidence, but because in their pride they refuse to recognize the evidence of anyone greater than themselves. So again, I challenge you, take a long, hard look at your own motivations. Ask yourself if you really want truth or just an excuse to dismiss God. In the next video, we will be examining the evidence for intelligent design and considering what Michael Denton refers to as the puzzle of perfection. I hope that this video has been informative for you. Thank you for liking and subscribing, as it does support the channel, and please share this video with those that you think may benefit from its message. God bless.